The bullet grazed her shoulder before she even heard the crack of the rifle, sending her stumbling backward into the dusty street of Ogden, Utah, while chaos erupted around her, and strangers scattered like tumbleweeds in a windstorm. Blood seeped through the thin fabric of her traveling dress, crimson spreading like spilled wine across the pale blue cotton, but Laura Garrett did not scream. She had learned long ago that screaming accomplished nothing except revealing weakness to those who would exploit it. Her vision blurred as strong hands gripped her arms, dragging her weight across the wooden planks of the sidewalk, and she caught a glimpse of piercing blue eyes beneath the shadow of a dusty Stetson, before darkness crept in at the edges of her consciousness. When Laura opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on a narrow cot in what appeared to be a simple room above a saloon, judging by the tinny piano music drifting up through the floorboards. The August heat of 1877 pressed down on the space like a wool blanket, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, bone-aching pain that made her teeth clench, but when she tried to sit up, a calloused hand gently pressed her back down. "Easy there, miss. Doc says you need to keep still for a spell. Bullet went clean through, but you lost some blood." The voice belonged to a man who looked to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead in careless waves. Those blue eyes she remembered from the street studied her with an intensity that made her heart skip in an entirely different way than fear. "Who are you?" Laura managed to whisper, her throat dry as the desert sand that blew through town on windy days. "Name's Zachary Kane. Most folks just call me Zach." He reached for a tin cup on the small table beside the cot and held it to her lips. "Drink slow. Doc left some water." The cool liquid soothed her parched throat, and Laura drank gratefully before turning her head away to indicate she had enough. "Why did someone shoot at me? I just arrived on the afternoon stage. I do not even know anyone in this town." Zach's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble that shadowed his face. "Was not aimed at you specifically, I reckon. The Dutton gang was robbing the bank across the street. You just had the misfortune of being in the wrong place when bullets started flying. I saw you go down and figured you needed help more than the bank needed another gun in the fight. You could have been killed." The words came out softer than Laura intended, but something about this stranger's willingness to risk himself for her well-being stirred an emotion she had thought long buried beneath years of carefully constructed walls. "Could say the same about you, and you were not even armed." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "What brings a lady like you to Ogden? Do not get many women traveling alone through here." Laura looked away, focusing on the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling rather than meeting those perceptive eyes. "I came to start over. My husband died 2 years ago back in Missouri. There was nothing left for me there, and I heard there were opportunities out west for those brave enough to seek them." It was the truth, though far from the complete story. She did not mention how her husband's family had turned cold after his passing, how the whispered conversations had followed her through town like persistent shadows, how the pitying looks had eventually driven her to pack what little she owned and board a westbound train with no clear destination in mind. Ogden had simply been where she decided to disembark, drawn by the rugged mountains that surrounded the valley and the promise of anonymity in a growing railroad town. Zach nodded slowly, as if he understood the unspoken parts of her explanation. "Ogden's a decent enough place if you can handle the rough edges. Railroad brings all types through here, and not all of them are interested in honest work. But there are good people too, if you know where to look." "And which type are you, Mr. Kane?" Laura asked, finally meeting his gaze again. "The type who does not leave wounded women bleeding in the street." He stood, the wooden chair scraping against the floor. "I should let you rest. Doc will be back to check on you in a few hours. I told him I would make sure you were looked after until you are strong enough to be on your feet again." "Wait." Laura reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his wrist before she could think better of the forward gesture. "I have no money to pay you or the doctor. Everything I had was in my bag, and I do not even know if it made it off the stage." Something flickered in Zach's expression, something that looked almost like pain, though Laura could not imagine why her financial situation would affect him so deeply. "Already taken care of. Your bag is here under the cot. I made sure to grab it before anyone else could." He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Get some rest, Miss Garrett. We can worry about everything else when you are healed." The following days passed in a haze of heat and healing, punctuated by the doctor's visits and Zach's quiet presence. Laura learned that Zachary Kane worked as a ranch hand on one of the larger cattle operations outside of town, that he had come to Ogden 3 years prior from Colorado after his parents died in a house fire, and that he spent most of his free time reading whatever books he could get his hands on, a habit that set him apart from many of the other cowboys who frequented the saloons and gambling halls. "My mother was a schoolteacher," he explained one evening as he sat in the chair beside her cot, a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets balanced on his knee. "She believed education was the key to bettering yourself, regardless of where you came from. Taught me to read before I could properly ride a horse, which my father thought was backwards, but he indulged her." His voice grew softer with the memory, and Laura found herself wanting to reach out and touch his hand in comfort. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Laura said instead, keeping her hands folded primly in her lap despite the urge to offer physical consolation. She was. They both were in their own ways. Zach closed the book and set it aside. "What about your family? Are they still back in Missouri?" Laura shook her head, the movement causing her shoulder to ache despite the laudanum the doctor had left for the pain. "My parents died when I was 17. Cholera. I married Thomas a year later, more out of necessity than love, if I am being honest. He was kind to me, and that seemed like enough at the time. And now?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Laura was not sure she was ready to examine. "Now I think kindness is the bare minimum one should expect from a partner. There should be more, should there not? Passion, understanding, a connection that goes deeper than simple companionship." She laughed, but it sounded bitter even to her own ears. "Perhaps I am naive to believe such things exist outside of novels." Zach leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, bringing his face closer to hers. "I do not think that is naive at all. I think that is hope, and hope is what keeps us moving forward when everything else tells us to quit." Their eyes met and held, and Laura felt something shift in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she had not realized was there. This man, this virtual stranger who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, saw her in a way that made her feel simultaneously vulnerable and safe. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The moment was broken by heavy footsteps on the stairs, and the doctor bustled into the room with his black bag and no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Kane, good to see you are still here. Miss Garrett, let us have a look at that wound and see how you are progressing." Zach stood immediately, offering the chair to the doctor. "I will be downstairs if you need anything," he said to Laura before disappearing through the doorway. Dr. Emerson unwrapped the bandages with practiced efficiency, his weathered face revealing nothing as he examined her shoulder. "Healing nicely. You were lucky the bullet did not hit bone or anything vital. Another week or so, and you should be able to move about more freely, though you will want to avoid strenuous activity for at least a month." "A month?" Laura's heart sank. She had so little money, and she could not impose on Zach's generosity for that long. Surely I can find light work before then. I need to secure lodging and employment. The doctor raised an eyebrow as he began applying fresh bandages. Miss Garrett, you were shot 5 days ago. I understand your situation is not ideal, but if you push yourself too hard too soon, you risk complications that could leave you far worse off. Give your body time to heal properly. After the doctor left, Laura lay awake staring at the ceiling and calculating her limited options. She had enough money for perhaps 2 weeks of modest lodging and meals, assuming she could find something cheaper than the room above the saloon. After that, she would need income, which meant finding work that would not aggravate her injury. The prospects seemed grim, and for the first time since leaving Missouri, Laura felt the cold grip of real fear settling into her bones. She must have fallen asleep at some point because she woke to find pale moonlight streaming through the single window and Zach sitting in the chair beside her cot once more. He had not lit the lamp, and in the silvery darkness his face looked younger, more vulnerable. "You came back," Laura said softly, not wanting to break the hushed intimacy of the moment. "I told you I would make sure you were looked after." He shifted in the chair, and she heard the creak of old wood adjusting to his weight. "I have been thinking about your situation. I might have a solution if you are willing to hear it." Laura pushed herself up carefully, mindful of her shoulder, until she was sitting with her back against the wall. "I am listening. The ranch where I work, the Triple K spread, belongs to a widow named Catherine Kelso. Her husband died last winter, and she has been struggling to keep everything running with just the hired hands. She mentioned a few weeks back that she was looking for help with the house, someone who could cook and help manage supplies. The position comes with a room in the main house and meals. It would not pay much in actual wages, but it would solve your immediate problems while you recover." Hope flared in Laura's chest, bright and almost painful. "Why would she hire me? She does not know anything about me. I could be a terrible cook for all you know." "Are you?" "A terrible cook, I mean." "No, actually. I am quite competent in the kitchen. Thomas always said I could make a feast out of nothing but hope and creativity." The memory brought a genuine smile to her lips for the first time in days. Zach's teeth flashed white in the moonlight as he grinned. "Then I will speak to Catherine tomorrow. She trusts my judgment, and I trust that you are exactly what you appear to be, a good woman who deserves a fair chance at a new start. You do not really know me, Mr. Kane. Maybe not all the details, but I know enough. I know you did not panic when you were shot. I know you have been patient and gracious despite being in pain and uncertain about your future. I know you speak with kindness even when discussing difficult memories. Those things tell me more about your character than any list of references could." He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "And I think you should start calling me Zach. Mr. Kane is what people call my father's memory. Then you should call me Laura. Laura." He said her name like he was tasting it, rolling the syllables around to see how they fit. "It suits you." "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Zach." True to his word, Zach spoke with Catherine Kelso the following day, and by evening he returned with news that the widow was willing to meet with Laura once she was well enough to travel to the ranch. The relief Laura felt was overwhelming, bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away before Zach could see them. She was not a woman who cried easily, having learned that tears solved nothing and often made situations worse. But the genuine care, this man showed her cracked something open inside her chest that had been sealed shut for longer than she cared to admit. The next 10 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Laura's shoulder healed steadily, the angry red wound fading to pink and then to the pale white of scar tissue. She practiced moving her arm in small increments, building back strength that had atrophied during her convalescence. Zach visited every evening after finishing his work at the ranch, sometimes bringing books to read aloud, other times simply sitting and talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved thunderstorms, but hated the oppressive heat of late summer. He had a younger sister back in Colorado, who had married a shopkeeper and wrote him letters every few months with updates about her growing family. He dreamed of someday owning his own piece of land, not a massive ranch, but just enough acreage to run a modest herd and build a home where he could finally put down roots. His favorite meal was beef stew with fresh bread, and he had a weakness for apple pie that bordered on comical. In turn, Laura found herself sharing details of her own life that she had never discussed with anyone. She told him about the shame she had carried after Thomas died, though she did not yet reveal the full reason behind that shame. She spoke of her love for reading, particularly adventure novels that transported her to places she would never see. She admitted that she had always wanted to learn to ride a horse properly, but had never had the opportunity. She confessed that sometimes she felt like she was playing a role rather than living an authentic life, always carefully maintaining the image of what a proper widow should be rather than allowing herself to simply exist as Laura. "Then stop playing the role," Zach said simply. "You are 1,000 miles from Missouri and anyone who knew you there. This is your chance to figure out who Laura really is underneath all those expectations." The observation struck her deeply, resonating with a truth she had not been able to articulate herself. "I am not sure I even know where to begin." Begin with one true thing, something you want, not something you think you should want. He waited, patient and non-judgmental, giving her space to consider the question seriously. Laura closed her eyes and let herself feel, really feel, for the first time in years. What did she want? The answer came quickly, rising up from some deep, honest place she had forgotten existed. "I want to feel alive again. Not just surviving, not just going through the motions, but truly alive and present in my own life." When she opened her eyes, Zach was looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "That is a good start." 2 days later, Dr. Emerson declared Laura fit enough to leave town, provided she continued to avoid heavy lifting and took care not to re-injure her shoulder. Zach arrived early that morning with a wagon borrowed from the ranch, and Laura felt an unexpected pang of anxiety as she gathered her meager belongings. The room above the saloon had been temporary, but it had also been safe and uncomplicated. Going to the Triple K meant new challenges, new people to impress, and the constant proximity to Zach, which both thrilled and terrified her in ways she was not ready to examine too closely. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a rough road that wound through scrub-covered hills and past grazing cattle that looked up with mild interest as the wagon passed. Zach handled the horses with easy confidence, his hands steady on the reins, and Laura found herself stealing glances at his profile when she thought he was not paying attention. The strong line of his jaw, the way the morning sun caught in his dark hair, the capable strength evident in his shoulders and arms, all of it combined to create an awareness of him that went beyond simple gratitude for his help. "Tell me about Catherine Kelso," Laura said, needing to break the silence before her thoughts wandered into even more dangerous territory. "What should I expect?" Zach considered the question carefully before answering. "Catherine is one of the strongest women I have ever met, which is saying something considering she runs a cattle operation in territory that does not always welcome female authority. She is fair but firm, expects honest work for honest pay, and has no patience for laziness or dishonesty. She loved her husband deeply and his death hit her hard, but she refused to sell the ranch like everyone expected. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and learned the business from the ground up. She sounds formidable. She is, but she is also kind in her own way. She will not coddle you or make exceptions, but if you prove yourself reliable, she will be fiercely loyal in return. He glanced at Laura, his blue eyes serious. I would not have suggested this if I did not think you could handle it. I hope your confidence is not misplaced. It is not. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. The Triple K ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Laura felt her breath catch at the sight. It was larger than she had anticipated, a two-story structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides and windows that gleamed in the morning sun. Outbuildings dotted the landscape around it: barns, stables, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various sheds whose purposes Laura could only guess. Horses grazed in a nearby corral, and chickens scratched in the dirt near what appeared to be a coop. It was, in short, exactly what she had imagined when she thought of Western ranches, yet somehow more real and intimidating than any mental picture could capture. Catherine Kelso emerged onto the porch as Zach brought the wagon to a stop, and Laura's first impression was of capability and strength. The widow was perhaps 40 years old, with auburn hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, sharp green eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and the kind of sun-weathered skin that came from years of outdoor work. She wore practical trousers and a simple cotton shirt, an outfit that would have scandalized the ladies of Laura's former acquaintance, but which seemed entirely appropriate for ranch life. "So you are the young woman Zach has been telling me about," Catherine said without preamble, her gaze sweeping over Laura with frank assessment. "I understand you were shot during the bank robbery in town." "Yes, madam." Laura climbed down from the wagon with Zach's assistance, determined not to show any weakness despite the lingering stiffness in her shoulder. "But I am healing well, and Dr. Emerson cleared me to work provided I avoid heavy lifting for another few weeks." "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. I managed a household back in Missouri and am comfortable preparing meals for large groups if needed." "Can you keep accounts?" "My late husband always handled the ledgers, and I have been muddling through on my own, but I know I am missing things." Laura hesitated, not wanting to oversell her abilities but also recognizing an opportunity. "I can manage basic bookkeeping. I kept the household accounts when I was married and helped my father with his store ledgers before that. I am not a trained accountant, but I am careful with figures." Catherine nodded, as if this answer satisfied some internal criteria. "Room and board, plus $15 a month. You will handle cooking for myself and the 6 ranch hands, maintaining the house, managing supplies, and helping me with paperwork as needed. Sunday afternoons are your own time to do with as you please. We eat breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, and supper at sunset. Any questions?" "That sounds more than fair, madam. Thank you for the opportunity." "Do not thank me yet. Wait until you have survived your first week." But there was the ghost of a smile at the corners of Catherine's mouth as she said it. "Zach, help her bring her things up to the spare room on the 2nd floor. Laura, once you are settled, come down to the kitchen, and I will show you where everything is kept." The room Laura was given was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the ranch yard toward the mountains beyond. It was larger than the space she had occupied above the saloon and felt almost luxurious after days of convalescence in cramped quarters. Zach set her bag on the bed and turned to leave, but Laura caught his arm. "Thank you. For everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you for your kindness." He covered her hand with his own, the contact sending warmth racing up her arm. "You do not owe me anything, Laura. I am just glad I was there when you needed help." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I will see you at dinner. Catherine is a good cook, but I suspect you will be even better." After he left, Laura stood alone in her new room and allowed herself a moment of pure relief. She had a place to live, meaningful work, and the promise of stability for the first time since leaving Missouri. More than that, she had found unexpected connection with Zachary Kane, something that felt dangerously close to the kind of relationship she had described to him, one built on more than simple companionship or necessity. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, fear followed close behind. Because Laura was carrying a secret that had driven her from her former life, a truth that had made her late husband's family turn against her, and the townspeople whisper behind their hands. Eventually, if she and Zach continued to grow closer, she would have to reveal that secret. And when she did, there was every chance he would look at her with the same disappointment and pity she had fled Missouri to escape. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Laura rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learning each man's preferences and quirks. There was old Samuel with his love of extra bacon, young Martin, who always requested seconds of whatever bread she baked, quiet Joseph, who thanked her solemnly after every meal, and the others whose names and faces quickly became familiar. The work was demanding but satisfying, giving structure to her days and purpose to her presence at the ranch. Catherine proved to be exactly as Zach had described: fair, firm, and surprisingly kind beneath her gruff exterior. She taught Laura the intricacies of ranch management with patience, explaining how to track cattle inventory, calculate feed costs, and project seasonal expenses. In the evenings, they sometimes sat together on the porch, and Catherine would share stories of her life with her late husband, painting a picture of a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection. "Henry and I did not marry for love initially," Catherine admitted one evening as they watched the sun set behind the mountains. "But we built love over time, brick by brick, through shared struggles and small kindnesses. By the time he died, I could not imagine my life without him." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Love is not always a lightning strike, Laura. Sometimes it is a slow dawn that grows brighter until you cannot remember the darkness." The words stayed with Laura long after she retired to her room, because they described exactly what was happening between her and Zach. Every evening meal where he caught her eye across the table and smiled. Every Sunday afternoon when they walked together along the creek that bordered the ranch property, talking about their dreams and fears. Every accidental touch when they reached for the same thing, the contact lingering a moment longer than necessary. It was a slow dawn indeed, but Laura could no longer deny the warmth spreading through her life like the first rays of morning sun. September brought cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing the ranch for winter. Laura helped Catherine preserve vegetables from the kitchen garden, putting up jars of pickles and tomatoes and beans that would sustain them through the cold months ahead. She learned to render lard, smoke meat, and make soap from tallow and lye. Her shoulder healed completely, the scar tissue becoming just another mark on her body, a permanent reminder of the day her old life ended and her new one began. It was on a particularly beautiful Sunday afternoon in late September that everything changed. Laura and Zach had ridden out to a small lake several miles from the ranch house, a spot he had promised was worth the journey. She had finally learned to ride with reasonable competence, and the freedom of it exhilarated her in ways she had not anticipated. The lake, when they arrived, was as perfect as he had described: a mirror of blue water surrounded by golden aspens. the leaves shimmering in the breeze like coins tossed by a generous hand. They dismounted and sat on a large flat rock near the water's edge, eating the lunch Laura had packed and talking about nothing of great importance. But then, in one of those comfortable silences that had become common between them, Zach reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers with deliberate intention. "Laura, I need to tell you something." His voice was serious, and when she turned to look at him, his blue eyes were intense with emotion. "These past months since you came to Ogden, since I pulled you out of that street and watched you fight to heal and rebuild your life, I have fallen in love with you. I know it might seem too fast or inappropriate given your widowhood, but I cannot keep pretending what I feel is simple friendship." Laura's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. This moment, the one she had secretly hoped for and simultaneously dreaded, had arrived. "Zach, I need to tell you something too, something that might change how you feel about me." Nothing could change how I feel. His certainty was absolute, but Laura knew better. She pulled her hand from his, needing the physical distance to find the courage to speak the words that had ended her old life. "When Thomas died, his family expected I would give them a grandchild to carry on his name. They had been waiting for that announcement, had assumed it was only a matter of time." She drew a breath, the words catching in her throat like fishhooks. "But there was never going to be a child because I cannot bear children. A fever when I was 19 left me barren. Thomas knew when he married me, accepted it even, but his family did not know until after he was gone. When they found out, when they understood that I had been the reason their line would end with their son, they turned against me completely." The silence that followed felt enormous, filling the space between them like flood water. Laura could not bring herself to look at Zach, could not bear to see the disappointment she knew would be written across his features. "Laura, look at me." His voice was gentle but firm, and after a moment she forced herself to meet his gaze. What she saw there was not pity or disappointment or any of the negative emotions she had braced herself for. Instead, his eyes held only warmth and something that looked remarkably like fierce protectiveness. "Then I will love you as you are," Zach said simply. "Children would be a blessing, but they are not what makes a life worth living or a love worth having. You are not less of a woman or less worthy of love because you cannot bear children. Anyone who made you feel that way is a fool who did not deserve you." The tears Laura had been holding back for months finally broke free, streaming down her face in hot tracks. But these were not tears of shame or grief. These were tears of release, of being seen and accepted in her entirety, flaws and all. "How can you say that so easily? Most men want sons to carry their name, a legacy." "I am not most men." Zach cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "And legacy is not just about blood. It is about how we live, how we love, how we treat others. If we are blessed to raise children someday, there are plenty who need homes and parents. But if it is just you and me, building a life together and filling it with love and purpose, that is more than enough. That is everything." Laura had never known that hearts could actually ache with happiness, but hers did in that moment. She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and relief and growing love into the contact. Zach responded immediately, his arms coming around her to pull her close, and for the first time since Thomas died, Laura felt completely and utterly whole. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Laura, not today or tomorrow, but when you are ready. Let me spend my life proving that you are exactly enough, exactly perfect, exactly everything I want." "Yes," Laura whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They stayed by the lake until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, making plans and sharing kisses, and simply existing in the joy of their mutual commitment. When they finally rode back to the ranch, Laura felt as if she were floating above her saddle rather than sitting in it. The world looked brighter, more vivid, as if she had been seeing it through gauze for years, and someone had finally pulled the covering away. Catherine took one look at their faces when they arrived and smiled knowingly. "I suppose I should start preparing for a wedding." "How did you know?" Laura asked, laughing. "The same way I knew Zach was in love with you the day he rode out here in a panic to ask if I had work for a wounded stranger. Some things are written plain for those who have eyes to see them." Catherine pulled Laura into a quick, fierce hug. "I am happy for you both. You deserve every bit of joy you can wring from this life." They decided to marry in November, giving themselves time to prepare properly and allowing Laura to feel settled in her own mind about the decision. Word spread quickly through the ranch and then into town, and to Laura's surprise, the reactions were uniformly positive. The ranch hands congratulated Zach with backslaps and ribbing, while the women she had met during her occasional trips to Ogden for supplies offered advice and assistance with wedding preparations. Only one shadow crossed Laura's happiness during those weeks. On a trip to town to order fabric for her wedding dress, she encountered a woman who had known Thomas's family and recognized Laura despite the miles between Ogden and Missouri. The woman's face had gone cold with recognition, and Laura braced herself for confrontation. "I heard about your situation," the woman said stiffly. "What you kept from that poor man's family." Laura lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "What I experienced was a tragedy that left scars not everyone can see. I did not keep anything from Thomas, and his happiness or lack thereof was between him and me, not his family or anyone else. But to deprive a family of heirs, to let that good name die out because of your deficiency, my deficiency, as you call it, does not define my worth as a person or as a wife." Laura kept her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "I am sorry if that truth makes you uncomfortable, but I am no longer willing to apologize for circumstances beyond my control. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a wedding to prepare for, and I intend to marry a man who loves me exactly as I am." She walked away before the woman could respond, her hands shaking slightly but her heart strangely calm. Zach had been right. She did not owe anyone shame or justification for her existence. She was Laura Garrett, soon to be Laura Kane, and she was precisely enough exactly as she was. The wedding took place on a surprisingly mild November afternoon, with most of the local community gathered at the small church in Ogden. Laura wore a simple blue dress that Catherine had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been her one concession to frivolity. Zach wore his best suit, though he fidgeted with the collar like it was trying to strangle him, and the sight made Laura smile despite the nervous flutters in her stomach. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with words spoken before God and witnesses about commitment and love and partnership. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed Laura with such enthusiasm that several people in the congregation laughed, and Laura found she did not care at all about propriety in that perfect moment. The celebration that followed was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the main barn that the hands had cleaned until it sparkled. There was food and music and dancing, and Laura felt embraced by a community she had not even known she was building during her months in Utah. Catherine gave a toast that made Laura cry happy tears, talking about the importance of family chosen rather than given by blood. Samuel played the fiddle with surprising skill, and Zach swept Laura around the makeshift dance floor until she was dizzy with joy and laughter. As evening fell and guests began to make their way home, Zach took Laura's hand and led her to the small cabin that sat about a quarter-mile from the main ranch house. Catherine had offered it to them as a wedding present, explaining that every married couple deserved their own space and privacy. It was modest but well-built, with a bedroom, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a small kitchen. The hands had furnished it with odds and ends, and Catherine had added curtains and rugs that made it feel like a real home. "Are you happy?" Zach asked as they stood together in the doorway, looking out at the star-filled sky and the dark silhouettes of mountains in the distance. "I did not know I could be this happy," Laura admitted. "When I left Missouri, I thought I was running away from shame and failure. But I was really running toward you, toward a life where I could be accepted for who I am rather than apologized for." Zach turned her to face him, his hands settling on her waist. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are. That is my promise to you, Laura Kane. And I promise to build a life with you that is full of love and purpose and joy, regardless of what shape that life takes." She kissed him softly, then again with more passion. "Take me inside, husband. I am ready to start our future." The weeks following their wedding settled into a new rhythm, different from Laura's days as Catherine's employee, but no less satisfying. She still helped with cooking for the ranch hands and continued to assist with the accounts. But now, she also maintained their own cabin, turning it into a home that reflected both her taste and Zach's. They ate breakfast together as the sun rose, kissing goodbye before he rode out to work, and reunited at day's end to share meals and conversation, and the kind of physical intimacy that Laura had never experienced in her first marriage. Thomas had been kind but passionless, treating their marriage bed like an obligation rather than an opportunity for connection. Zach was different in every way that mattered. He was attentive and creative and genuinely interested in Laura's pleasure as much as his own. He made her feel desired and beautiful and powerful, as if her body was something to be celebrated rather than merely tolerated. For the first time in her adult life, Laura understood what people meant when they spoke of passion, and the discovery was intoxicating. Winter arrived in earnest by early December, bringing snow that blanketed the valley in white and turned the ranch into something from a storybook. The work was harder in the cold, requiring extra effort to care for animals and maintain structures, but there was something magical about those months. The long evenings allowed for more time together, sitting before the fire while Laura sewed, and Zach read aloud from whatever book he had borrowed from Catherine's surprisingly extensive library. They talked about everything and nothing, building the kind of intimate knowledge of each other that could only come from consistent presence and attention. It was during one of those evenings in January that Laura first broached a subject she had been considering for weeks. "I have been thinking about what you said at the lake, about children and legacy." Zach set his book aside immediately, giving her his full attention. "What about it?" "There is an orphan train coming through Ogden next month." Catherine mentioned it in passing, said there are always children who need homes, and that the ranching communities often take in older boys who can help with work. Laura hesitated, searching his face for any sign of reluctance. "I was wondering if we might consider attending, just to see if there is a child who might fit into our lives." Something bright and hopeful sparked in Zach's eyes. "Are you sure? I meant what I said about being content with just the two of us." "I know you did, and that is exactly why I want to explore this possibility. You did not marry me for children, so if we do this, it will be because we both genuinely want to expand our family, not out of obligation or expectation." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. I think we have a lot of love to give, Zach. It seems a shame not to share it with someone who desperately needs it. Then we will go to town next month and see who is looking for a home." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You are remarkable, do you know that? I am learning to believe it, thanks to you." The orphan train arrived in Ogden on a frigid February morning, bringing with it nearly 30 children ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Laura and Zach stood with other prospective families as the children disembarked, their faces showing everything from hope to terror to resignation. It broke Laura's heart to see such young people already marked by life's hardships, but it also strengthened her resolve to make a difference for at least one of them. Most families were drawn to the younger children, the ones who still had that untouched quality that made them seem moldable and fresh. But Laura found her attention caught by a girl of about 12 who stood slightly apart from the others, her dark eyes wary and her posture defensive. She was thin in the way that spoke of chronic hunger rather than natural build, with tangled hair that might be pretty if properly cared for, and a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. "That one," Laura said quietly, nodding toward the girl. "I want to talk to her." Zach followed her gaze and nodded. They approached the girl together and Laura crouched down slightly to be less imposing, though the child was already nearly as tall as she was. "Hello, my name is Laura Kane and this is my husband Zach. What is your name?" The girl regarded them with deep suspicion. Rose Miller. That is a beautiful name." Laura kept her voice gentle and non-threatening. "Have you been traveling on the train for very long since New York? 3 weeks, maybe more. I lost count of the days. That must have been exhausting." Laura glanced at Zach, who nodded slightly. "Rose, we are looking to welcome a child into our home and our family. We have a ranch outside of town where we raise cattle and horses. It is beautiful country and there is plenty of food and warm clothes and a bed of your own. Would you be interested in hearing more about what that might look like?" Rose's eyes narrowed. "Why would you want me? I am too old to be cute like the little ones and I am a girl, so I cannot do heavy ranch work like the boys. We want you because you look like someone who has survived things that should not happen to children, and you did it on your own strength and will. That kind of resilience is rare and valuable." Laura held the girl's gaze steadily. "And for the record, I run a ranch household, and there is no shortage of important work that has nothing to do with how strong your arms are. I could use help in the kitchen and the garden, and someone to talk to during the long winter evenings. Does that sound like something you might want?" For the first time, a crack appeared in Rose's defensive armor. "You really mean it? You would take me even though I am not a baby or a boy?" "We really mean it," Zach confirmed. "My wife is the best cook in the territory, and I suspect you have not had a decent meal in far too long. What do you say we go get you some proper food and talk about whether you think we might suit each other?" They spent the next few hours with Rose, buying her a hot meal at the local restaurant and answering her questions about ranch life with patient honesty. Laura was impressed by the girl's intelligence and perceptiveness, the way she asked probing questions designed to reveal any false promises or unrealistic expectations. By the time they approached the representative from the Children's Aid Society to begin the formal process, Laura was already imagining Rose's presence in their home and feeling excited about the prospect. The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward, requiring character references and proof of stable income and housing. Catherine gladly provided a glowing reference, as did the Reverend who had married them and Dr. Emerson, who still remembered Laura from her recovery after the shooting. Within a week, Rose Miller officially became part of the Kane household. The transition was not without challenges. Rose had learned to trust no one, to expect disappointment, and to protect herself with silence and emotional distance. She followed instructions without complaint, but offered nothing of herself, keeping her thoughts and feelings locked away behind impenetrable walls. Laura recognized the behavior for what it was: survival strategy, and did not push, instead simply maintaining consistent presence and care. It was Zach who first found a way through Rose's defenses. He discovered that she was fascinated by horses, but had never been allowed to interact with them beyond watching from a distance. One Sunday afternoon, he invited her to the stables and spent 2 hours teaching her how to groom one of the gentler mares, explaining every step and answering her endless questions with patience. By the end of the day, Rose was smiling for the first time since her arrival, and the walls had developed their first small cracks. From there, progress came in increments. Rose began helping Laura with cooking, revealing a natural talent for baking that delighted them both. She started talking more at meals, sharing small details about her life before the orphan train: a mother who died when Rose was 7, a father who disappeared shortly after, years in an overcrowded orphanage where kindness was rare and cruelty common. Each revelation was given tentatively, as if Rose expected judgment or rejection, but Laura and Zach responded only with compassion and acceptance. By April, Rose had relaxed enough to occasionally laugh at Zach's terrible jokes and to seek out Laura's company by choice, rather than obligation. She had gained weight, her face filling out to reveal the pretty features that malnutrition had obscured. Her hair, properly cared for, proved to be a rich brown with subtle red highlights that caught the sun. She began to look like what she was: a young girl rather than a hardened survivor, and the transformation filled Laura with pride and protective love. One evening, as they were washing dishes together, Rose spoke quietly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." Laura handed her another plate to dry. "Why do you and Mr. Kane not have children of your own? I mean, you are married and everything. Most couples have babies." Laura had known this question would come eventually, and she had prepared herself for it. "I had a fever when I was younger that left me unable to bear children. It is just one of those things that happen sometimes, through no one's fault." Rose was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "But you still got married even though you could not give your husband babies." "Zach married me because he loves me, not because of what I can or cannot give him in terms of children. And I married him for the same reason." Laura set down the dish she was washing and turned to face Rose fully. "Family is not just about blood or giving birth. It is about love and commitment and choosing to build a life together. You are our daughter now, just as much as any child I might have carried in my body." Rose's eyes filled with tears, the first Laura had seen from her. "Really? You really think of me that way, really and truly?" Laura pulled the girl into a hug, feeling Rose's thin arms wrap around her waist and hold on tightly. "You are our daughter and we love you. That is not going to change." "I love you too," Rose whispered into Laura's shoulder. "Both of you. I did not think I would ever have a real family again, but I do. I really do." As spring melted into summer, the Kane household found its rhythm. Rose continued to blossom under consistent love and care, growing taller and more confident. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle between pastures, developing a special bond with a young gelding that Zach eventually declared was hers to care for. She devoured every book Catherine would lend her, often reading aloud to Laura while they worked in the kitchen. She began making friends among the other ranch families, occasionally being invited to visit neighboring homesteads. Laura watched her daughter's transformation with a heart so full it sometimes felt like it might burst. This was what motherhood was supposed to be, not the biological act of childbearing, but the daily work of nurturing a young person into their best self. The early mornings making breakfast together, the evenings helping with difficult arithmetic problems, the quiet conversations about hopes and dreams and fears, the unconditional love that said, "You are safe here, you are valued here, you belong here." Zach was equally devoted to Rose, teaching her skills that would serve her well in frontier life: how to shoot a rifle accurately, how to read weather signs in the clouds, how to doctor a sick animal, how to mend tack and sharpen tools. But more importantly, he taught her through example what a good man looked like: someone who kept his word, who treated women with respect, who worked hard but also knew when to rest, who could be strong and gentle in equal measure. "You are a wonderful father," Laura told him one night as they lay in bed, listening to the summer insects singing outside their window. "I am just following your lead," Zach replied, pulling her closer. "You have shown me what it means to love unconditionally, to see past surface circumstances to the person underneath. Everything good in my life traces back to the day I pulled you out of that dusty street in Ogden. Everything good in my life traces back to the same day." Funny how tragedy and blessing can be so closely intertwined. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Zach. Not after everything I went through in Missouri, not with the limitations I carry. But you and Rose have given me a life beyond anything I dared dream about. The limitations you thought you had only existed in the minds of people too narrow to understand that value comes in many forms." He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "You are an incredible wife, an amazing mother, and the love of my life. Nothing about you is limited." That summer brought an unexpected opportunity that would change their lives in yet another way. A neighboring ranch family, the Hendersons, needed to relocate suddenly due to the wife's failing health. They were looking to sell their property quickly, and for a fair price to someone they trusted to maintain it properly. The land bordered the Triple K and would nearly double the grazing capacity if combined effectively. Zach came home from work one evening with the news and a cautious hope in his eyes. "Catherine is considering making an offer, but she wondered if we might be interested in partnering with her. The Hendersons have a small house on the property, better than our cabin. If we invested our savings and took on some additional responsibility, we could own a stake in the expansion and have more space for our family." Laura's mind immediately began calculating possibilities. They had been careful with money, and between her salary and Zach's wages, they had managed to save a respectable amount. It would take most of their reserves, but the investment could provide long-term security and opportunity. What would additional responsibility look like? "I would oversee the day-to-day operations of both properties, essentially becoming Catherine's partner rather than just an employee. You would manage both households initially, though Catherine mentioned possibly hiring another woman to help with the increased workload." He leaned against the kitchen table, watching her face carefully. "It is a risk, but it is also the kind of opportunity that does not come along often. We would be building something real, something we could eventually pass on to Rose. Let us do it." Laura's decision was immediate and certain. "We came west to build new lives, and this feels like the next logical step. We have the skills and the work ethic, and Catherine clearly trusts us. It would be foolish not to seize this chance." The negotiations and legal work took several weeks, but by August, the deal was finalized. The Kane family moved into the Henderson house, which was indeed more spacious and comfortable than their cabin. Rose was thrilled to have her own proper bedroom, decorating it with wildflowers and treasures she had collected during her time on the ranch. Laura threw herself into organizing 2 households with her characteristic efficiency, while Zach began the challenging work of integrating the Henderson property's operations with the triple KTK's existing systems. It was hard work, demanding long hours and constant attention, but it was also deeply satisfying. They were building something tangible, creating a legacy that had nothing to do with blood inheritance and everything to do with perseverance and vision. On particularly difficult days, when problems seemed insurmountable and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm, Laura and Zach would remind each other why they were doing this: for Rose's future, for their own security, for the life they were creating together. The first winter in their new home brought unexpected challenges. A particularly harsh cold snap killed several head of cattle, representing a significant financial loss. The roof on one of the Henderson barns collapsed under heavy snow, requiring immediate and expensive repairs. Rose caught influenza and spent 2 terrifying weeks fighting high fever while Laura barely slept, sitting vigil and applying cool cloths and praying to a God she was not always sure was listening. But they weathered each crisis through combination of determination and community support. Other ranchers helped retrieve and butcher the dead cattle, ensuring none of the meat went to waste. The ranch hands worked extra hours to rebuild the barn, refusing additional compensation beyond regular meals. Dr. Emerson made daily visits during Rose's illness, often staying late into the night to monitor her condition, and Catherine sat with Laura during the worst hours, offering silent companionship and occasional words of encouragement. When Rose finally recovered, thin and weak but alive, she clung to Laura with desperate gratitude. "I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to leave you and Papa all alone." "You are not going anywhere," Laura said fiercely, holding her daughter close. "You are stuck with us for the rest of your life, young lady, so you better get used to it." "Good. Because I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Spring of 1879 brought renewal in more ways than one. The ranch recovered from winter's losses with a strong calf crop and good prices for their stock. Laura discovered she had a talent for trading, often accompanying Zach to town and negotiating deals that consistently favored their interests. Rose, now 13 and growing into a capable young woman, took on more responsibility around the property, proving herself reliable and hardworking. It was during this time that they received news from Zach's sister in Colorado. She and her husband were expecting their 4th child, and she wanted Rose to come visit, to meet her cousins and experience a different part of the territory. After much discussion, they decided to allow the trip, arranging for Rose to travel with a reputable family who was heading in that direction and would deliver her safely to her aunt's home. The goodbye at the stage depot was harder than Laura anticipated. It was only for 6 weeks, but it was the first time since Rose joined their family that they would be separated for any significant length of time. She hugged her daughter tightly, whispering reminders to be safe and polite and to write as soon as she arrived. "I will be fine, Mama," Rose said, using the name that had gradually replaced the more formal address. "And I will miss you every day." "We will miss you too, sweetheart. Have a wonderful time and remember you can always come home early if you need to." After the stage pulled away, Laura leaned against Zach, feeling strangely bereft. "The house is going to be so quiet without her." "It is going to be strange," Zach agreed, "but also good for her to have experiences beyond the ranch. She needs to know there is a whole world out there, even if she chooses to come back here." The weeks of Rose's absence did feel odd, missing the daily rhythms of her presence. But they also provided Laura and Zach time to reconnect as a couple, to remember the early days of their relationship before the responsibilities of parenthood consumed so much attention. They took long rides into the mountains, stayed up late talking by the fire, and rediscovered the passion that had drawn them together. When Rose finally returned, bronzed from summer sun and full of stories about her cousins and the sights she had seen, she brought with her something unexpected, a letter from Zach's sister, suggesting they consider taking in another child. A boy this time, around 10 years old, whose family had died in a mining accident and who was currently living with overwhelmed distant relatives in Colorado. "Anna thinks we would be perfect for him," Rose explained, handing the letter to Laura. "His name is Daniel, and she says he is smart and good-natured but struggling because he reminds his relatives too much of their loss. She wondered if we might have room for him here." Laura and Zach exchanged long looks, communicating silently in the way couples who know each other deeply can. They had not planned to expand their family again so soon, but neither had they planned on Rose, and that had turned out beautifully. "What do you think?" Zach asked Rose directly. "It would affect you too, having a brother." Rose considered seriously before answering. "I think I would like having a sibling, and I think we have enough love to share with another person who needs it. We are really good at being a family, so why not make it bigger?" "Out of the mouths of babes," Laura murmured, smiling. "I suppose we should write to your sister and learn more about this Daniel." The correspondence took several weeks, during which they learned that Daniel was indeed 10 years old, small for his age but wiry and tough. He had been working in the mines with his father before the accident and possessed skills beyond his years. He loved animals, particularly dogs, and was good with mechanical things, often fixing broken equipment with creative solutions. The relatives were not unkind, but they had 5 children of their own and limited resources, and Daniel's presence was clearly a burden they were ill-equipped to bear. By September, arrangements had been made. Zach traveled to Colorado personally to meet Daniel and, if all seemed appropriate, bring him back to Utah. Laura spent the days of his absence preparing for their potential new son, setting up a room and trying not to get too attached to the idea in case it did not work out. But when Zach returned a week later with a small, solemn boy who had dark hair and gray eyes that seemed too old for his face, Laura's heart opened immediately. Daniel was polite but guarded, clearly uncertain what to make of this new situation. He carried all his worldly possessions in a single cloth bag and wore clothes that had been mended so many times they were practically thread lace. "Welcome home, Daniel," Laura said gently, crouching down to be at his eye level. "We are so glad you are here." "Thank you, madam." His voice was barely above a whisper. "You can call me Laura or Mama if you prefer eventually, but there is no rush on that." She stood and gestured toward the house. "Are you hungry? I made stew and fresh bread for dinner." For the first time, a hint of interest sparked in those gray eyes. "I am very hungry." "Then let us get you fed and settled. Rose has been excited to meet you all week." Integrating Daniel into the family proved both easier and more difficult than Rose had been. He was eager to please and hardworking to the point of exhaustion, never complaining even when tasks were clearly beyond his capability. But he was also deeply traumatized by witnessing his parents' death, plagued by nightmares that woke the household several times a week. He flinched at loud noises and sudden movements, conditioned by months in the dangerous mine environment where inattention could be fatal. Zach worked with him patiently, teaching him ranch skills while also showing him that not every day had to be about survival, that there was space for play and rest, and simply being a child. Laura made sure he ate regularly and wore clothes that fit properly, and had access to books that captured his imagination. Rose appointed herself his guide and protector, showing him around the property, and introducing him to the animals and explaining the unspoken rules of ranch life. Slowly, over the course of weeks and then months, Daniel began to relax. His nightmares decreased in frequency. He started asking questions instead of waiting silently for instructions. He laughed at Zach's jokes and sought out Laura's company when he was hurt or troubled. He and Rose developed a typical sibling relationship, bickering over small things but fiercely defensive of each other to outsiders. The first time Daniel called Zach Papa was during an ordinary moment passing tools in the barn, but the word hit Zach with visible force. His eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away, and he pulled the boy into a tight hug that communicated everything words could not. That night, as they prepared for bed, Zach said to Laura, "I never expected to be a father to two children who do not share my blood, but I cannot imagine anything making me happier." "Blood is just biology," Laura replied. "Family is choice and love and commitment. What we have built together is exactly what family is supposed to be." The years that followed were full in the best possible way. The ranch prospered under Zach and Catherine's partnership, gaining a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Laura's domestic management and trading skills became legendary in the region, with other ranch wives often seeking her advice. Rose grew into a capable young woman who could ride as well as any cowboy and had inherited Laura's talent for numbers. Daniel overcame his early trauma to become a cheerful, inventive boy who was always building something or fixing equipment that others had declared beyond repair. They celebrated holidays as a family, creating traditions that were uniquely theirs. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, and the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers over water rights or boundary disputes. They dealt with the normal challenges of raising children, illnesses and injuries, difficult moods and teenage rebellion, questions about the future and discussions about responsibility. When Rose turned 16, she attracted the attention of several young men in the area, much to Zach's dismay and Laura's amusement. They had serious conversations about the qualities to look for in a partner, about not settling for less than she deserved, about the difference between infatuation and genuine love. "You and Papa set a high standard," Rose told Laura one evening. "I want what you have, someone who sees all of me and loves me anyway, someone who is a true partner in building a life." "You are wise beyond your years," Laura said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "And you will find that person when the time is right. Do not rush into anything just because you think it is expected." Daniel, meanwhile, revealed a talent for working with horses that went beyond simple riding. He could gentle the most skittish animal, seemed to understand what they needed almost instinctively. Zach began giving him more responsibility with the stock, and by the time he was 14, Daniel was earning money from neighboring ranches for his training services. "I think he has found his calling," Zach observed proudly, watching Daniel work with a difficult mare that no one else had been able to manage. "He is going to be sought after throughout the territory if he keeps developing this skill." As 1884 approached, bringing with it changes and new challenges, Laura sometimes reflected on the journey that had brought her to this life. 9 years since a bullet had interrupted her arrival in Ogden and sent her stumbling into Zachary Kane's arms. 9 years since she had whispered her deepest shame and heard him reply with unconditional acceptance. 9 years of building something beautiful from the ruins of her former existence. She was 35 years old now, her dark hair showing streaks of gray that she did not bother to hide. Her hands bore the calluses and scars of hard work, and her face showed the lines earned from years of sun and laughter. She was not the same frightened widow who had arrived in Utah with nothing but a bag of belongings and a heart full of fear. She was Laura Kane, wife and mother and ranch partner. She was strong and capable and deeply loved. She was exactly enough, exactly perfect, exactly where she belonged. On their 9th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised her with a picnic at the lake where he had first proposed. They rode out alone, leaving Rose and Daniel under Catherine's supervision, and spent the afternoon reminiscing about their years together. "You have any regrets?" Zach asked as they lay on a blanket, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Laura considered the question seriously before answering. "Not a single one. My life did not turn out anything like I expected when I was young, but it turned out better than I could have imagined. I have a husband who loves me completely, 2 incredible children who fill my days with joy and purpose, meaningful work that challenges me, and a community that accepts me. What could I possibly regret? I love you, Laura Kane. I loved you the moment I saw you standing in that street, determined not to show fear despite being injured. I loved you when you confessed what you thought was a terrible secret. I have loved you every day since, and I will love you for whatever days we have left. And I love you, Zachary Kane, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for accepting me when I thought I was broken, and for building this beautiful life with me one day at a time." She rolled onto her side to face him fully. "You saved my life in more ways than pulling me out of that street. You gave me back my belief in my own worth, and that is a gift I can never adequately repay. You do not owe me anything. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They made love there by the lake, beneath the wide Utah sky, with a passion undiminished by years of marriage. And when they finally dressed and prepared to ride back to the ranch, Laura felt completely content. Not because her life was perfect or without challenge, but because it was authentically hers, built on a foundation of love and acceptance. The ride home took them past the spot where Rose had first learned to handle cattle, where Daniel had conquered his fear of heights by climbing to fix a fence on a hillside, where family gatherings had been held under summer stars. Every inch of the land held memories now, layers of experience that transformed property into legacy. As the ranch house came into view, Laura saw Rose and Daniel working together in the corral, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Catherine stood on the porch of the main house, waving in greeting. Smoke rose from chimneys, promising warmth and dinner and the comfortable rhythms of home. "What are you thinking?" Zach asked, noticing Laura's contemplative expression. "I am thinking that I was so wrong about what made a life meaningful. I thought it was about giving birth to children, about leaving behind a biological legacy. But legacy is so much bigger than that. It is about the love we share and the people we raise and the community we build. It is about facing our deepest fears and choosing connection anyway. It is about second chances and chosen family and the courage to believe we are worthy of happiness. That is a good thought. It is a true thought." Laura nudged her horse forward, eager to reach home. "Come on, husband. Our children are waiting and I am starving." They rode the final distance together, side by side, heading toward the life they had built and the family that waited. Behind them, the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and deep purple. Ahead, lights began to glow in windows, beacons of welcome and belonging. And Laura Garrett Kane, who had once thought herself broken beyond repair, who had whispered her shame and heard it met with love, who had traveled 1,000 miles to escape her past and found her future instead, smiled with pure, uncomplicated joy, because she was home, because she was loved, because she was, in every way that mattered, exactly enough.